We all can agree that wargaming is not the best when it comes to balancing tier 10s in a World of Tanks Blitz, or really any tier at that. But tier 10 is the most competitive tier of the game. It's the tier where everybody wants to showcase their skills. Unfortunately, most people don't have those to begin with, but that's besides the point. We, in today's video, are going to be going over all the changes I would make to tier 10 if I was the head of balancing for wargaming. Obviously, there are going to be agreements and disagreements in the comments down below. Most likely, a lot of disagreements because I'm going to be going over 57 tanks. So, at least some point in this video, you're probably going to disagree with something I say. So, let me know what you think about what I say in today's video. But I want you to keep in mind that I'm not just nerfing one single tank. I'm nerfing or buffing each one of them to a specific way that I think makes them not only unique and dynamic for their own playstyle and skill, but as well keeps the entire tier 10 balanced as a whole as well. So with that aside, let's start off with the tier 10 American Light, the Sheridan. There's two things I would do to this tank. First of all, I would give it a 105mm, very similar to the M48 Patton. Now the M48 Patton sits at 0.317 dispersion. I would buff the dispersion on the Sheridan's 105mm to about 0.308. I think that light should have very accurate guns. However, I would give it very poor premium pen of maybe with Cali 315mm. That way, you have to use it like a light tank. You don't sit in front of your opponents and just butter them with heat. I think that would be the case. I would also lower the heat penetration of the 150mm that it currently carries by about 10mm because for some reason it has 340 mils a pen, even though every other medium has 330. That's really all I do to the Sheridan. The only other thing I would change is that I would remove its view range by about 10 meters. Not a crazy amount, but making it pretty on par with all the other lights when it comes to view range in tier 10. Moving on to the M48 Patton, honestly, I wouldn't change anything on it. I think it's already a really good vehicle. It's got decent mobility, it's got good armor, it's got nice gun depression, it's got everything a tank needs, and because of that, I wouldn't change the Patton. I think it's a really good vehicle, and that also goes for the M60. I think that this is a really solid tank. It's got good armor, it's got great gun depression, it's got really everything that goes well. You know, if I was going to make one change to the Patton, I'd give it 9 degrees of gun depression. That way it has the same as the M60, making them both basically the same playstyle. Moving up to the Concept 1B. What would I do to this vehicle? Well, it's kind of hard to balance the Concept. The first thing I would do is increase its alpha to 400, but in return, I would nerf its damage per minute by a little bit. I wouldn't say a huge amount, but currently it sits at 2,337 when it comes to DPM. I would nerf its DPM to 2,500 if you are running Cali, and that would mean it's probably about 2,700 if you're running Rammer. I think that would make it a little bit more balanced because it's got less DPM, but more alpha, making it chunkier, but also a little bit more fragile. When it comes to the rest of the vehicle, honestly, there's really not much to change about the Concept. I think its upper plate was nerfed to a substantial amount where it's not that strong anymore. It's got a weak spot on the roof that you can pen with heat shells hauled down. Honestly, I wouldn't say the Concept is that broken anymore. I would leave it the way it is, just kind of do what I did there, make the DPM a little worse and give it a bit more alpha, and I think it would be fine with that, honestly. T95E6, I think it's fine the way it is. It's got great mobility, fantastic DPM, fantastic gun depression. The only thing I've thought about doing is I would say remove the hatch on the vehicle and make the DPM a bit worse. So currently it's sitting at really good DPM, like 3,000 even with Cali, as you can see. What I would do is make it maybe 2,700 DPM with Cali, and I would remove the hatch on the vehicle, maybe make the turret cheeks a little bit weaker, but overall I think that would make the tank a lot more flexible, a lot stronger. The fact that everybody can just butter that hatch does annoy me a little bit with this tank. So I would definitely try to come up with a way to at least make the hatch smaller without having the vehicle broken in the process. The T57 Heavy, very simple. First of all, I would make it have a 3-second interclip. I would also remove shell reload boost, and that's it. That's all I would do. I think right now the T57 Heavy's clipping damage is too fast. I don't think there's any tank that should be able to deal 1,200 damage in 5 seconds, let alone with shell reload boost, get it out in 4.5. I really think that the 57 Heavy should just have a little bit of a clip nerf on its dumping time. As I said, I wouldn't change anything else on the vehicle. I'd make the turret armor a little bit worse. There's like some red spots on the turret that are really stupid bounces. I would remove those. If you aim at the side of a 57 turret, you shouldn't bounce. It should pen every single time. So That's really what I'd do to the 57. I'd still keep the DPM at around 2900. I just think that it shouldn't get out its damage as fast. You should not be punished for doing your job in the front line because a 40% 57 heavy player YOLOs you. The T10's is very simple. I would buff its DPM by about 150. Right now, the T10's is sitting at a pretty poor 2,410 damage per minute. I would buff the DPM up to about 2,000, let's say 600, and that would be pretty good, 2,800 with Rammer. I would nerf its dispersion to about 0.308, and I would nerf its aiming time to about 3.5 seconds. I think that would make the tank pretty fair when it comes to its gun handling and aiming with accuracy, and I also think the DPM would make it really solid. The only other thing I'd do to the E5 is buff its reverse speed to 15 kilometers per hour, because why does it go so darn slow in reverse? Apart from that, I would also remove its reactive armor because it doesn't need it. It's kind of stupid that it even has it in the beginning. And I'd also probably get rid of sandbags because it doesn't need it. The M6 I would do two things. First of all, I would actually remove the double shot gun. I think that this gun is toxic, and I think that the fact that it can get 900 damage out in 1.71 seconds is a little stupid. There's two possible opportunities. If Wargaming didn't want to remove the two-shot gun, and I was forced to keep it, I would say make the intro clip maybe 3 seconds, and that's it. I'd keep the DPM the same at 2,500, I'd keep the dispersion the same, but I would just make the intro clip 3 seconds. That way, you can back up if you're being shot at by the vehicle. At the same time, for the 3-shot gun, I wouldn't really change anything about the 3-shot gun. I think the tank is really good at the way it currently is. The only thing I'd say is I'd maybe nerf the DPM down to about 2,700 with the 3-shot. I think right now at 3,000, it's just a little bit too much DPM. I'd also get rid of Reticle Cali and Shell Reload Boost. It doesn't need it. Apart from that, I think the tank is really solid the way it is with the armor profile and everything like that. So yeah, M6 is fine with me. Up next, we have the T10E3. Honestly, I like how Wargaming balanced it, and I don't like how Wargaming balanced it. The only thing I would change for the T10E3 is I would make the gun a bit more accurate on move. Wargaming absolutely deleted the DPM to 2,650, which is not a lot. So, what I would do, as I said, is I would just buff its accuracy a little bit. I'd leave the mobility the same, although I would increase its reverse speed up to 14 kilometers per hour, and I would also remove super speed boost. That way, it can accelerate as well. It would be nice that it's a little bit more accurate, and it can reverse. I think that would make it pretty fair and balanced. Up next, you have the T10E4. Very simple. Remove the hatch. There you go. Done. Balance change is done. The E4 is a great gun, fantastic accuracy, good DPM. It's got everything. It's even got decent armor. Remove that hatch, the vehicle becomes an insanely strong tier 10. And there you go. Leopard 1, I wouldn't change a thing. It's got a great gun. It's got fantastic accuracy, fantastic mobility. Yeah, I wouldn't change anything on the Leopard. The only thing I would say is give it spall liner. That's it, though. Everything else about the Leopard is fantastic, and I'd leave it the way it is. E50M, I would also leave the same. I think Wargaming did a good job balancing its dispersion to be a little bit worse. I think the Alpha's fine at 340. Yeah, I don't actually have a problem at all with the E50M. I like the mobility it carries. I like everything about it. So, yeah, the only thing I would say is I would revert the turret to be a little bit thicker, not on armor-wise, but a little bit thicker on the actual cheeks. I think that the turret's a little bit too small right now and trying to actually hit the weak spots. So yeah, I'd just make the weak spots a little bit bigger on the turret. But apart from that, I think the E50M is fine. Kampfpanzer 50-ton, I wouldn't change a thing. It's actually a really well-balanced vehicle. The VK90-01P, I would nerf the side armor a bit. Right now, the VK90 has this shot trap where it says the side armor is a pen when you're aiming at it at an angle like this. You shoot the side armor and it bounces. I would change that to actually be a pen or show up as red. I would nerf the lower plate by about 15 millimeters. That way, when it's angling it, it's still possible to penetrate, because I can't tell you how many times AP shells have bounced that lower plate. And what I would also do is I would remove the hatch. I would completely cut the hatch off of the vehicle, but I'd make the turret cheeks weaker. That way, it has weak spots, but as well, the main weak spot is taken away. I think that'd be a pretty good way to balance the vehicle. Again, I'd also get rid of reticle calibration, because the vehicle doesn't need it. The VK72-01K is a very interesting vehicle. It right now sports very strong frontal armor, but very poor side armor, and I would change that. I would make the lower plate on the VK72 similar to an an E100's thickness, so you can penetrate it with the most standard ammo. In fact, I'd make it about 10 less than an E100. However, I would make the side armor, specifically the little side boob cutout, about maybe 380 to 390 millimeters thick when correctly side scraping. That way, it's almost impossible to pen the tank in a correct side scrape, but it does have a turret cheek weakness. As we already know, you can load premium into the turret cheek. I think the VK72 would be much more enjoyable if it played kind of like a VK90, where you could side scrape with it, pen people in a side scraping position. I wouldn't change anything else about the vehicle, but I would simply just make the side armor better and the frontal armor worse. I think that would really balance out the tank. The mouse, a couple changes. First of all, I would make the upper plate impenetrable. I don't care what people say, the mouse's upper plate should be impervious to any standard or premium ammo. I would also make the turret cheeks about 15 millimeters thicker. That way, mediums are going to really struggle to pen the front. I don't think mediums should be able to pen the front of a mouse. I mean, it's literally the heaviest super heavy in the game, and mediums can butter through the turret cheeks. So I'd buff the turret cheeks by 15 millimeters. I'd also buff the lower plate by 15 millimeters. That way, it's a lot harder to pen. Everything else I'd leave the same. I'd leave the side armor the same. I'd leave the turrets on the side and everything like that the same. Even the mobility. I'd also make the gun just a little bit more accurate. Right now, its gun is absolutely trash on its on-movement dispersion. I would buff the on-movement dispersion to be what it used to be. That way, it could actually hit shots without having to fully stop and allow the enemy to aim it on your weak spots. Apart from that, though, I like the way the mouse is, and I think it's pretty fun. E100, I would nerf its turret cheeks by about 15 millimeters. I think right now they are too strong. Apart from that, I wouldn't... Oh, I'd also nerf its traverse speed by maybe about 5 kilometers per hour. I think its traverse is just a little bit too good right now, but apart from that, I think the E100 is a really solid tank. It's got a nice gun. Oh, yeah, this is the other thing I'd change. I would give the E100 much more DPM with the 12.8. Right now, it sits at 2,345 DPM with the 12.8. I would buff it to 2,500 DPM with the 12.8, and that would mean you have around 2,700 if you're running it with rammer. I would think that would make the tank much more enjoyable, and it would actually create a big disparity on what is the better gun option, so I would definitely do that. I'd also buff the penetration a little bit on the premium ammo when it comes to it, but yeah, apart from that, I think that'd be a really good balancing decision. The Jagdpanzer E100, I would nerf its turret cheeks, again, by 15 millimeters, just like the E100. I think they're a little bit too thick right now. Apart from that, I'd leave everything else the same. Grill 15, very simple. I would buff its camo, not to Waffenträger levels, but I would buff the camo to be good enough that you're not going to be detected if you're shooting at anybody from 200 meters or away. I would also say that you don't get spotted very easily in the tank. I would keep the traverse, the mobility the same. I would buff its alpha to 640, but I would also leave the DPM the way it is currently. I think that if Wargaming buffed the camo, but its DPM was still around 31, 3200 with the accuracy, the tank would be fine. That's all it needs. So that's what I would do to the grill. I would just make it have really good camo, and I would give it 640 alpha and leave the DPM the way it is currently. I think that's all really the grill needs or wanted ever. T100 LT, I wouldn't change at all. I think the T100 LT is a fantastic tank. What I would say is I'd nerf the upper plate and maybe the turret a little bit, and then in return, I would actually, you know what? I think this would be better. So nerf the upper plate, nerf the turret armor to a point where it's very easy to pen. I would then increase its DPM to what it previously was nerfed at, around 3,500, but I would nerf its premium pen to about 290. That way, it doesn't penetrate much frontally, but it has really, really good DPM. So if you can get advantage of your opponent and get to the side of them, you're fantastic, everything, you know? I'd also remove the spawning capability, is the fact that this thing has that stupid spawning mechanic. I'd get rid of that. I think it's stupid. I think it breaks the game. So that's what I do to the T100 LT. T62A, I'd actually leave. I think the way the 62A is currently balanced is pretty fun with the mobility and everything that it carries. It's got good gun depression. It's got really good DPM. So I think the 62A should stay the same. T22 medium, I would also leave the same. It's been basically power crept to a point where I'd say it's pretty balanced. So yeah, the only thing I would say is I would buff the the ammo rack on the T22 medium by about 20%, because I hate seeing this thing get ammo racked, whether it's on my team or the enemy team. I would also make that hatch on the roof actually a weak spot. That way, if it is trying to use its turret armor haul down, you have a spot to penetrate it. Object 907, very simple. I would nerf its dispersion. I think that right now, 0.272 is a little too good. I would make the dispersion 0.308. I think that's still good enough dispersion that the vehicle could hit most of its shells. I'd buff the DPM by about 100, and there you go. That's what I do to the Object 907. Object 140, I would buff its turret roof. I think the turret cheeks should stay the same, but I would buff the turret roof to a point where most standard ammunition is going to bounce it unless it's from tank destroyers. I think that premium ammo should be able to cut through the turret quite easily, but I think that at least having good turret armor for the most part would be good for the 140, and it would make it a really enjoyable tank. The IS-7, very simply put, I would buff the penetration of the gun. Currently, the IS-7 has some of the worst pen values in tier 10 at 303. I would buff it to be about 320 on APCR. I think that's enough to penetrate most opponents and would get the job done. In return, I would nerf its mobility by a little bit on the traverse speed, and as well, I would make it so that the armor is what it used to be previously as a weak track wheel. That way, if it over angles, you can put it in the track wheel. So I'd make the side armor a bit weaker, a lot less troll, but I'd make its gun a lot better on that penetration, kind of evening it out and making it more of an average heavy. Then we move on to the IS-4. Now, the IS-4, I wouldn't do anything to it. I think the IS-4 is fine the way it is. It's got good pen, it's got decent DPM, it's got decent mobility. I wouldn't change the IS-4. I think it's a really good tank currently. Object 260. First of all, I would nerf its mobility. Right now, the Object 260 goes 50. I would change it to 40 kilometers per hour. I would keep the power to weight good. I'd keep it as a power to weight that it's able to reach a very good top speed fast, but I think that the top speed should only be 40. I think the reverse should be about 16. And then when it comes to the gun, first of all, I'd buff the pen to about 320 millimeters of heat. And as well, this is the big part, I would make its armor on the turret and the hull very good. I'd make the upper plate about 300-ish effective without using gun depression. That way you have to load premium dependent on the upper plate. And I'd make the turret about 320 effective. So you have to load premium to pen the front of the vehicle apart from the big lower plate. I'd leave the lower plate the same. I'd leave the side armor the same. I just think that frontally this tank should have better armor. So that's what I do to it. I'd nerf the mobility a bit and make it much stronger on the hull. Object 268, I would not change. I think it's a really good vehicle. It's got great camo, good alpha, good accuracy. Everything about it is completely fine. The Object 263, I also would not change. I think the way Wargaming buffed its superstructure, which was the biggest problem for it, honestly solved a lot of the problems with the vehicle. So yeah, I think the Object 263 is absolutely fine, and I wouldn't change anything about it. The Object 268 version 4, here's what I would do. I would nerf the V4's alpha. I would make the alpha, instead of 690, I would make it 560. But in return, I would keep the DPM the same, and I would make its dispersion better. So instead of being 0.407, I would make it maybe 0.35, which is much more accurate. I would make its aiming time a little bit better, maybe 3.8 seconds, and I'd leave everything else the same. So it's a lot more accurate, has the same DPM, just less alpha. That way, it's not as punishing if you get shot by it, and at the same time, it's much more enjoyable for the user to use. Vickers Light, I would buff back to its previous state on the highest view range in the game. As I said, I nerfed the Sheridan's view range, so I would buff the Vickers Light view range to be the most in tier 10. Apart from that, I'd leave everything else on the Vickers Light the same. I would nerf the turret, though. I would make it so that the mantlet on the Vickers is not strong. I'd make the mantlet incredibly easy to penetrate with any AP shells. That way, it's like a light tank, so it's got great mobility. I'd buff its camo a little bit, and yeah, everything else I think should stay the same. What's its top speed? If it's 65, I'd say let's buff it to, so instead of 65, let's buff it to 68. And apart from that, I think the Vickers would be fine. Next up, we have the FV4202. Now, very simply put, the 4202 is in a very good state right now. I think that the tank doesn't really need any changes apart from one thing, and that is the accuracy. Right now, the 4202's gun is .308 dispersion. I think that I would make it a bit better than that. I'd make it about .299. It's not actually the accuracy I'd buff, it's the aiming time. Right now, its on-movement dispersion is awful because it got nerfed. So I'd just make the on-movement good. I'd make it so when you're driving the tank, you can hit snapshots, you can hit shots on the move. That's really what it needs, so I'd do that. Chieftain Mark 6, I would simply do one thing, and that is buff its turret armor. Right now, heat shells can penetrate the Chieftain Mark 6's turret. I think the hatch should still be a weak shot, but I would make everything else on the turret impervious. I would make the entire superstructure of the turret not pennable unless you shoot that hatch. That's what I do to the Mark 6, leave everything else the same. FV215B. This is a vehicle I would change a lot. First of all, I would make the upper plate very thick, maybe 310 millimeters thick. That way you have to load premium to pen it, and if you're hull down, you're basically not going to pen it. I would make the side armor on the FE215B, let's say 140 millimeters thick. That way, if you're side scraping with it, you're actually going to bounce shells and not be penetrated. I think that this tank should have really good side armor, really good frontal armor. What is the side armor now? Yeah, 106. So I'd make it 140, make the front pretty good on that upper plate. Lower plate can still stay weak. I'd buff the track wheels to a point where being penned at an angle like this doesn't exist anymore, or like this. And then finally, I would nerf its gun. I would nerf its gun by a decent amount. So right now it's 3,000 DPM, great dispersion, everything like that. I would make the DPM about 2,600 with rammer. I would make the dispersion about 0.317 and the aiming time about 3.5 seconds. I would still give it hash with about 130 millimeters of pen, and I'd leave everything else the same, although I'd buff its average damage to about 415 because I like that number. I think that would make this tank a lot more enjoyable. Also, I would increase its top speed to 38 kilometers per hour. I would increase its reverse speed up to 15 kilometers per hour. I would get rid of sandbags, and I would get rid of improved engine power speed boost. What do you think about that? I personally really want to see the FE215B as a rear-turreted, kind of heavily armored heavy tank. I think that'd be really fun. It would make it a lot more enjoyable, and it would actually be super cool to see this thing just being driven on the battlefield like that. So that's what I'd like to see done to the FE215B. I know there's people out there that like it the way it currently is, but obviously that's my opinion on it, so deal with it. Super Conk, I'd leave the same, apart from one thing, and that is the turret armor. These cheeks have spaced armor that you can penetrate with heat. That makes no sense. I would make it so that these spaced armor cutouts on the Super Conk turret are impervious. If you're shooting heat through them, guess what? You can't pen now. So I'd make that the first case. Second of all, I would make the Super Conk about 20% more resistant to high explosive shells, because I cannot tell you how irritating it is to get hit by a high explosive ammunition in the vehicle. Apart from that, I'd leave everything else the same. What's its reverse speed? If it's only 12, I'd say make it 15. Okay, no, reverse speed's fine. All right. Up next, you have the FE217 Badger. Very simply put, I would nerf the traverse speed a bit. Right now, its traverse speed is too good in my opinion. It's at 45 degrees a second. I'd nerf it down to about 38 degrees a second, but in return, I would make the accuracy on the Badger much better on move. I'd make it about maybe 20% better on move. Apart from that, everything else about the Badger, I would leave the same. 4005, I would revert back to its old gun. I would give it the 460 Alpha with 3 shells, everything it had previously. That's what I do for the 4005. I think it was stronger then. Not only did it have more DPM, but it got out the damage in a really fast amount of time, and it hit harder. So I would say the previous 4005 was better, and that's how I'd like to see the tank. I would also remove Spall Liner on the vehicle. Yes, you heard that right. I would remove Spall. Because I think that this tank is really deadly, and I think it should be punished for playing it incorrectly. So that's what I would do. The FE215B 183. Ooh, this is a very, very tricky one. The FE215B 183, I would make a little bit less accurate to what it previously was. I would also make it so that the FE215B 183 has worse heshpen. That's it. That's all I do. Instead of sitting at the 230 millimeters of heshpen it currently sits at, 242 actually, I'd make it 210 with Cali. That way, you can penetrate opponents only if you're good, that you can aim for weak spots. That's what I do to the 183. Also, I'd nerf its DPM down to about 2,600 with Cali, and I think that would make it a bit more balanced on that aspect. In return, I would buff its camouflage rating by about 10%, and Yeah, that's all I do. I think that it should have a bit better camo, but as well, it should have worse penetration and a bit worse accuracy. I think that would actually balance it out, and worse DPM. What do you think? Next up, we have the STB-1. Very simply put, I would get rid of the 11 degrees of gun depression it has, and I would give it back its old 10. I would also give it back the dispersion that it had at .308. Everything else I'd leave the same, because I think the vehicle would be fine like that. The Type 71, very simply put, right now, the hull armor is too strong. I would nerf the hull armor by about, let's say, 20 millimeters, to a point where premium shells will be able to penetrate the tank confidently as long as you're a decent shot. I would also make the lower plate. Actually, you know what? No, I wouldn't nerf the upper plate. I lied. I would leave the upper plate the same. I would nerf the lower plate by angling it more towards your opponent. So instead of being so far back as you can see the lower plate is, I'd make it more like the Super Conch, where it's a big old gaping lower plate. That's what I do for the Type. I'd make it a much larger lower plate, and I would make it much weaker. I would also make it so that the track wheels on this tank are weak spots. If you over-angle, you will not only be tracked, but penetrated. Apart from that, I would also remove its super improved suspension. I would give it the 9 degrees of gun depression as a flat statistic, and I would remove the specialization equipment in total and just leave it as, normal like the Hori has, which is improved optics or camouflage net. That's what I do for the Type 71. The Hori, I would nerf its penetration on the standard and premium by about, let's say, 10 millimeters both. Honestly, the premium I'd nerf it by about 20. There'd be 360 millimeters of pen instead of the 380. I would also nerf its accuracy. Instead of being at .308 with the 3-second aiming time, I would make it a 4-second aiming time and .317 dispersion. In return, I would buff its alpha to 600, and I would make its power to weight a little bit better. That's what I do to the Hori. I think that'd make it a lot more enjoyable. It would hit harder, but it would also have a bit more of a downside on its penetration and accuracy. All right, next up we have the 121, and I would not change a single thing about the 121 apart from its heat pen. It's currently at 319. I'd buff it to 330 on the heat. That way it actually has decent penetration. Apart from that, I'd buff the ammo rack so that it doesn't get, one shot every game if you hit it in the ammo rack. The 121B, I would make the... Honestly, I wouldn't really change much on the 121B. It's got a nice gun, it's got good penetration, it's got good mobility. The only thing I'd say for the 121 is maybe give it a little bit more upper plate armor. That's about it. I'd leave everything else the same. WZ 111-5A. Very, very simple. I would buff the heat pen on the tank. I would also buff the upper plate. Right now, I think the 5A is in a strong spot, but I don't think it's strong enough yet. What I would do is I would buff the upper plate to be about, not super strong, but, that you can't pen AP with. I'd say maybe 300 millimeters thick. So you can pen it with any tank with premium. But I think that it should be about 300, maybe 290 thick on the upper plate. That way you need to load gold to pen it. With that in mind, I would also make the 5A have a bit worse dispersion. Instead of .326, I'd make it more like an IS-7 value at .35. And then finally, I would buff its heat pen to about 350 millimeters on the heat instead of currently the 330 it has. I think that would make it a lot better. Let me know what you think. Next up, we have the WZ-113. The 113, I would honestly leave the same. I think it's really good right now. I think that it's in a balanced state because of the way it plays. So yeah, I'd leave the 113 the way it is. The WZ-113 GFT, I'd also leave the way it is. I think it's really strong. It's a great tank destroyer. It can get the job done, so I wouldn't change anything about it. Bosch Ation 25-ton, very simply put, I would change the interclip to 2.5 seconds. I would remove shell reload boost. I would change the interclip to 2.5, and that would be it. Everything else stays the same, and the bat chat's balanced. AMX 30B, I would give it 3,500 effective DPM with rammer. And that's it. I think that right now the 3,100 DPM is absolute trash, and it needs to be 3,500. It would make the tank much better. I would also increase its top speed back up to what it originally was at, like 68? Oh, no, 65 or 66. I'd buff the top speed back up to what it previously was. I don't know why Wargaming nerfed this tank, but yeah, I would give it more DPM and as well much better mobility to what it previously was. AMX M4, I'd leave the same. I think it's a fantastic tank and really, really solid. I guess if I were to say anything changing on this vehicle, I would make the track wheels just a bit stronger. But apart from that, everything else would stay the same. AMX 50B What I would do is I would change the interclip to a 2.7 seconds, and I would make the aiming time just a bit better. Instead of 3.4 seconds, I would make it 3 seconds. I would make the interclip, as I said, 2.7 instead of 3, and I'd leave it the same. I think it's pretty cool right now. I just think that it needs a teeny bit more accuracy, and it would be fine. The Foch 155. Very simply put, I would give it more gun arc, and that is it. I would also make its track wheels a bit stronger. Right now, whenever you try backing up in the Foch, if you slightly angle it, it becomes incredibly easy pen in the track wheel. So buff the track wheels by about 20 millimeters, and I would also make the gun arc much larger, maybe about 10 more degrees in total on both sides. That way, your gun doesn't disperse when trying to aim at opponents, especially moving ones. I think that would balance out the Foch. Progetto, very simply put, first of all, I would buff its accuracy. Right now, it is the least accurate medium, like in tier 10. It's currently sitting at, let me see, it is 0.335. I would change its dispersion to 0.308. And I would increase its shell velocity a little bit. Apart from that, I'd leave everything else the same, and Progetto would be balanced. TVP, I would change the current 1.5 second interclip, which is absolutely stupid, to a 2 second interclip. I would also decrease the DPM to about 2,500. I would also make the dispersion just a little bit worse on move. I think the final dispersion is fine, but I think that dispersion after shot and on move should just be a little bit worse, and I think the TVP would be fine. 60 TP, I would remove tungsten shells from. I would buff the ammo rack to a point where it's not a weak spot, and that's it. I think the 60 is fine after that. The Kron, I would give it a top speed of 45 kilometers per hour. I would get rid of super speed boost. I would make its reverse speed instead of 15 kilometers per hour. I would give it, I don't know what else I'd change. Honestly, I'd leave everything else the same. I'd say I'd just make the gun a little bit less accurate in return for the increased mobility that it has. I think that would be fine, yeah. Okay, finally, we have the Minotauro, which is the tier 10 Italian tank destroyer. And the Minotauro, I would simply buff the reserve shell on and its traverse speed. Right now, the Minotauro's traverse speed is awful at 30 degrees a second. I would buff it to 38 degrees a second. And then I would also change the reserve shell to, instead of currently, which is a 21-second reload, to 14.5 seconds. That's it. Oh, and I'd also make the dispersion maybe about 0.35 instead of 0.398. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. These are the changes I would make to Tier 10 in a World of Tanks Blitz. Let me know if you agree or disagree with the changes I've stated here. But as always, if you'd like to see more like it, please consider smashing that subscribe button down below. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.